Faculty of Architecture at the University of Manitoba. I would like to welcome everyone to our 13th annual Atmosphere Symposium. It is truly minus 32 right now in Winnipeg. So thanks for joining us. My name is Jason Chon, a faculty member within the Environmental Design Program, serving as the chair of this year's symposium. This year, the symposium programs are spread throughout the week to offer the much needed break from our screen time, and also to strategically connect with different time zones across the world. With the theme Radical Manifestations, we will be connecting with practices engaged in different time zones: Berlin, Shanghai, Bangkok, Hong Kong, and Newark. Through the 5 keynotes, we'll examine the resourcefulness and imaginations in their practices, which will inspire our operations within today's context. The conversations that will follow will be joined by members of our faculty and the local professional community to further contextualize the discussion forwarded by the keynotes. We'll also be screening 40 recent winning short films of Archi Shorts International Film Festival on Wednesday as a sort of intermission of the symposium program. So please remember to tune in for the intermission. So that'll be wonderful. As a housekeeping note, we will be using the Zoom chat box to deliver important recognitions and credits. So please turn your chat boxes on. We also welcome your engagement throughout the program through the chat box. Please remember to mute your audio, and you're welcome to keep your video on as much as you wish. With that, I would like to turn the baton to Dietmar Straub, who will be introducing our first speaker of the program, Radical Manifestation. Please enjoy.
So thank you very much, Jay. And it won't take me too long because there's a slide on your screen and you had time to read this. The only thing I want to add, I experienced Martin Rein-Cano once at a conference. I was in the audience, and he was such a serious, but at the same time, such an entertaining presenter. And that's my expectation a bit for today as well. And I'm pretty sure that you will fulfill my hope. So Martin, the screen is yours. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you very much for your warm words and for your introduction. Now let's see that some time ago, I hope I'm as entertaining as I used to be. However, the media, this kind of disconnection doesn't seem to be very helpful. But so I will try to meet your big expectations. So the presentation I prepared for today. And it doesn't work. Oh, there it is. The presentation that I prepared for today is called Personal Public Space, and it has to do maybe, it has to do mainly with a project we did some years ago called Superkiln, that is still probably the most famous and mostly published project we ever did. Maybe also the best we ever did. I don't know. That will be judged maybe on some point later. But still a very important project for us, as it is, as the title says, also kind of a personal experience. And I think good projects in the end tend to combine personal, let's say, personal motivations with the public realm or with public needs. So in the moment that you are somehow personally involved in what you do, and maybe even can share partly the experience you are talking about, it can be an interesting project. And this project, however, is a project that is driven very much by immigration and by the search for identity. And these are two things that for me has been a lifelong project, let's say, something that has to do with my own history. So in that project for me was a kind of almost like a merge of my professional and my personal life. I've always been a very personal person in terms of motivation towards my projects, but at this time I had to reflect on a lot of my, let's say, personal dramas to make this project, and it has been not always a joy, but very interesting, and it's an ongoing process still. As for this lecture, it was also requested from me to show that. So and the radicality in it, I love the title also of this series of lectures. The idea of radicality, especially when it comes to landscape architecture, as we were starting to talk about that before the audience was appearing, that landscape architecture has this tendency of being kind of behaving, you know, being kind of, I would say landscape architecture is a little bit like woman before emancipation, you know, the sense that they have to wait to be asked to dance instead of just leading the dance, let's say. And I think radicality is important. It's not the only thing, and it's not always appropriate, but radicality is something that we have to allow ourselves as a profession, as much as we allow ourselves to be peaceful or balanced or harmonious or whatever. But radicality and provocation are as much weapons we are allowed to use as all the other ones that we traditionally are being using in the profession. So as I said, migration has been an issue, and it's interesting how, let's say, the borders between places, between personal experiences, between public experiences. My presentation is not working. Oh, there it is. How these things are starting also to merge more and more. So now we are communicating through different time zones. We are not even really in a place, you know. So everyone just has to say what kind of temperature they have. So I heard you are in -32. I'm in -9, but it's also quite a lot, quite cold for our Middle European context. Since climate change, we don't have this kind of cold anymore. But however, the sense of non-place, the sense of being in a kind of a cloud is something that we are that was there before Corona, and I think it's being potentiated probably to a certain extent through Corona. Where am I? Who do I belong to? Which is my community, etc. So where is my professional life? Where's the place where I work? Is there a place where I work, or do I work from home? And I migrate, let's say, several kilometers, several miles to my workplace, but I do it through the net. So moving in the world, by the way, nothing new. The Homo sapiens moved from Africa to the rest of the world just by foot. Took him a while to get to China and also to get to Australia. Got on a boat even without much knowledge of sailing probably those days. So the idea that we move and that moving is part of our nature, if you want, and that didn't change is maybe an important issue. But since the fascist movements, especially in Europe, especially going out of Germany, but maybe even before that, since the establishment of the nation state, the narrative that there is one nation with one sort of ethnical people, one language, and ideally also one religion, have been so predominant as a narrative, that the idea that we have some kind of identity flow maybe, and that identity is not also defined by a nationality or even a place, but by many other factors, is something that I think has always been part of our human nature. But as I said, it's maybe a narrative that has been repressed or substituted by the idea of pure blood, of, you know, Aryan and whatever, all these fascist nation state ideas. Obviously in the Americas, slightly different. In Canada, probably different due to Canada being part of the empire of the Commonwealth, of a kind of an extension of a British idea. So it wasn't really about immigration. It was just about extending or expanding an empire with the same people. As Canada, as Australia had very restrictive migration laws for a long time, and America obviously developed another narrative. But we could see when Trump was in power, how this kind of open immigration narrative was never meant to be multicultural or really open-minded, but well, whatever, also kind of nationalistic, repressed, let's say. And it was a certain sort of people that were welcome and others were not. So this is the issue. And as I said, Europe where I'm based, and also with this project, happens to be didn't have the idea of migration as a narrative. If at all, it had the idea of big empires like the British Empire, or also the Francophonie, the idea of a French cultural empire, let's say, a different narrative, but in the end similar in motivation. Let's say it's a Eurocentristic idea in which, let's say, there would be kind of satellites around them, but nothing that would in the end change Europe, let's say. But this is what is happening now. Europe is dramatically changing due to immigration, due to the moving of people. People are wanting to move to where there is wealth and where there's freedom, where there is good governance, all these things we have here. So there is no coincidence then that people come to us. What this makes us proud, because it shows that we are attractive, and that's good. On the other side, it creates conflicts, let's say identity conflicts, conflicts of interests, especially of the lower classes, competing then with new immigrants that are usually in majority lower classes, and these conflicts create, let's say, social tension. And the project I'm going to show to you, the Superclean project, tries to, let's say, position itself within this political conflict, and tries to show how landscape architecture not only can be, let's say, beautification, but can contribute to a political discourse. So, as I said, migration and the moving through the world is not only a question of immigration like it used to be some generations ago, but where you would move from one place to the other, and that would be a one lifetime decision. But nowadays, we even turn to live in a kind of a wandering circus, moving around the world in many different ways, following our interests in in many different ways. I have in my office now, I would say 2/3 of the people working for me are not German. Of them, I would say half of them, even being here for years, don't speak German. So even the idea that you migrate somewhere and to belong somewhere, you have to learn the language. It also seems to be a shame, as I think, because I think it's wonderful to learn languages, but something that I have to respect, that the interests of these people living in this kind of moving circus and not having the necessity, let's say, to access a new language because they can use our new lingua franca being English, makes communication easy, and why invest the time in learning another language, etc. But that shows, let's say, how the idea of moving has been dynamized by new media, by possibilities, by education, but also by a certain globalization of knowledge and of work strategies and of techniques of works, etc. So places are getting also closer and closer to each other in terms of how we develop and think and work around things, what makes them moving even easier. So, and Superclean is trying to, let's say, use certain elements of, or analogies, let's say, of the garden as maybe being a good example of what, maybe how the world in terms of immigration could be understood. Because the garden was always some kind of an early adapter, as I would call it, a place that not only is part of the original narrative of humanity being the sorry for that. Can you still hear me? Okay, so the garden being this kind of also original of the let's say godly narrative, no, of the appearance of the world, of the appearance of humans in the world. So the first place, let's say, wasn't the landscape, but it was a garden. So this kind of strange, ambiguous space, let's say. The gardens are always this kind of always a place of contradiction, because they never can be perfect, you know. In a sense, they always have a perfect imperfection in the best of the cases, and this kind of ideas may be very much related to what we are as humans. This idea we were discussing beforehand, that half the people decide out of fear and half the other people decide out of trust. I would say that we humans, every one of us, is half fear and half trust, let's say. No? And we can as passionate hate as we can love passionate. So in the end, we are all loving parents as much as we are murderers, and that can change also quite fast. And maybe the garden is a good analogy to that, no? Because it's not, let's say, the brutality of nature, but it's also never to be fully civilized into trust and balance and whatever. But it has to always also kind of be cultivated, no? As we call it. No? And this idea is something that always fascinated me, and this ambiguity is something that fascinated me because also of the dynamism that is within these places. The idea that they're never finished, and I think identity is something that is never finished. The idea that you're a person and also have the same identity from the moment you're born to the moment you die. For everyone that migrated anyways is something that is clear not the case. But even if you didn't migrate, you know that your age, your generation, your I don't know, your experiences that you will have through life, the people you would meet in life, being a parent or not, whatever, relationships of all sorts, your personal life as a professional will eventually also change your personality, your character over time, and will open up different facets of who you are. And also the garden is in those terms a similar place that because of growth, because of weather, because of all these things that create this dynamism is maybe a good analogy to this kind of openness. On the, let's say, artistic part, so this is on the nature part. It's nothing new. We all know this: the idea of growth, the idea of decay, the idea of life and death, etc., that are always within the garden, are interesting, and also because it plays, let's say, with a certain godness, with a certain idea that it's given, that it's not made. You know, when you see a building is always something that is clearly made. A garden is always half made by God or by nature, or whatever narrative you follow. Yeah, so that it has this kind of a genetic accident, a non-controllable element in it that is very interesting. And I think we humans are very similar to that. On the other side, maybe to coming back to, let's say, that special part of garden history being the English landscape garden, what always fascinated me here is how, let's say, on different levels, there is a fascination. One of them is the dissolution of borders, the idea that the garden, that is etymologically, as the word paradisos means walled garden from Persian, and also the word garden means, let's say, a walled space, etymological. This essential idea of the garden has been dissolved. That's the reason when I discuss with architects, I tell them our Bauhaus, the dissolution of our walls, that was maybe the idea of the Bauhaus and of the modern movement, happened actually in the 18th century when the landscape architects of those days got rid of the border, so that the garden, that it's not clear where the garden starts and the garden actually stops. And this is maybe something very, very useful for us today, as we are losing borders for good and for bad, or we have to deal with this issue that borders are not as clear anymore, are ambiguous, are not visible, are whatever, are social, are racial, are gender, are whatever, but all of these things are dissolving. So how do we deal also with this idea aesthetically and socially, with this idea of dissolving borders, also in terms of identity? Who are we if we are not anymore quite clearly one thing, but we can be many things and have choices, let's say. So this is something very interesting. Another thing that I loved about this garden is that it actually allowed itself to, let's say, invent a new narrative out of nothing, in terms that created a new tradition that was actually not, let's say, not English. So they introduced Greek temples, for example. They started to introduce, you know, James Cook. So all the new plants brought from the new worlds were suddenly introduced into that space. So it was a kind of almost a global garden, if you want, with all sorts of elements: Roman bridges, Greek temples, and everything, let's say, in a wrong way, in terms that obviously never a Greek temple would even have these proportions, or even the bridge that looks so perfect is always a kind of a miniature, or it has a kind of a delusion, a kind of an illusion idea to it. So it's not realistic, let's say. So it's a surreal realism with which we are met, in which we are also part of the image. You know, that we call the English landscape garden the picturesque. So because it actually, and also that is something incredibly modern, that you think of a place as being taken out of pictures rather than out of reality. You know, we are so much into site specificity and whatever. The reality is that most of the things that are being produced in the world have been bad copy pastes, including the English landscape garden. You can see that much more obviously turning into Asia or into Arabia or other places, how they kind of copy paste things maybe from Europe or other places. So in that case, the British were, as they didn't have much culture themselves, they were interested in importing some of this glory of the past from the Greeks, from other people. And what is interesting, even in these gardens, almost none of the vegetation, none of the architecture was British. In the end, it turned into, we call it today the English landscape garden. So something that was foreign became part of a national narrative, ultimate part of a national narrative. Not only in terms of the gardens, but you could say that the whole empire. If you look at the development of New Zealand, for example, a place that was transformed through sheep, not only, but also through the British, into a kind of a bucolic English landscape. So the idea that we would all live in this kind of British cloud, let's say, of borderless. You know? And another idea that's also interesting, people think that always the English landscape garden, being a romantic space, was meant to be a balance to the industrialization that was happening at the same time. I think that's not the case. In the end, if you think that it was maybe the first piece of art that you would experience through moving through it, because the pictures actually that you had in front of you were not stills. These pictures were meant to be experienced as a row of pictures. So it was like a motion picture. So you would walk and you would have different pictures happening along you. So you would have a waterfall, and you would have a temple, and then you would have a beautiful tower, and etc., etc. So you would have all these sceneries, let's say, put together. So in these terms, maybe the English landscape garden is even the predecessor of the movie, but instead of having the movie moving in front of you, you move through the movie. And this is maybe also something that is part of our modern experience. If we think how we actually act with these things are a kind of make us also part of the movie. You know, it's not anymore that we are. So the clarity of who is the consumer and who is the producer is something that also is getting lost. Also in the process of planning, by the way, you have to involve the people. So it's not you are the genius and the author and you do whatever you want because you're great. No, it's about having other people maybe with no experience involved for whatever reasons, sometimes good, sometimes waste of time, but it's part of the general development that we have, that maybe in terms of design started with the landscape garden. The landscape garden was in those terms maybe much more ahead as we think. And the dynamism of it, as I said, you have to walk through it, so it's not as still. If you think of the Baroque was a place that was framing a human activity. It was a theater for humans that was like a frame for them to act, for the court to display their theater, their state theater. And suddenly we are alone, we walk through this place and only experiences meanwhile we're walking. So the idea of the dynamization of the world through the Industrial Revolution was actually resembled in this garden, and the garden is not a balance to it, but in other terms, a dynamic system. So, as I said before, what is also interesting is that the copy was first, so that the idea of the picture was before the original. So these gardens were literally copied from two painters, Claude Laurent and Nicolas Poussin, two French painters that created an incredible fascination within British aristocracy, because they had this kind of eclectic mix of things. So there were never real places. They were just, let's say, a collection of things that you like to have. So you put them together and you create your own identity. And it was like maybe now when you go to your Chinese client, he shows you an image of something, says, I want to have exactly a garden like that, or I want to have a house like that, you know. So these guys, these British guys went with these pictures to Capability Brown and told him, here, I want a garden that looks exactly like that, yeah, in which I can combine all sorts of things. Like in that image, where you can see the Vesuve, which is in Naples, and then you see on the other side the castle of the angel that is in Rome. So you just also join places. You don't have a different of places anymore. The idea that you can live in different time zones was actually already before the internet was established by the English garden, by this paintings, by the garden. And then you have this kind of interesting aspects then that actually create an interesting analogy, the cedar. The cedar originally comes from Lebanon, but I had never seen any more beautiful cedars than in the English gardens. So, and then is the question, is cedar, let's say, a foreign tree? You know, is it Lebanese or is it British? You know, it's much more happy with rain. It's the only thing that is happy with rain, probably. That's the reason it likes England. And can you imagine British gardens without cedars? And the cedar is probably very happy. So for me, this is exactly this idea of migration. The cedar is at the same time foreign, but also local. So it didn't lose, let's say, its DNA of being somehow Lebanese. On the other side, obviously, it grows different, also with the pampering that it gets in these gardens and the British weather. So it becomes, and it can be both. And as I said before, identity is in very, very few cases just one thing, but a combination of many, many things. And so it's very hard to actually press them into one idea. And this is, I would say, the new narrative we are all in the end working now on, is what means identity, what means nation, what means belonging, what means all these things, what means place, yeah, in terms of location, in terms of geography, in terms of history, in terms of all these things. And it's in that reasoning, and as we are landscape architects, and in the end we do not create landscapes, by the way. I always thought that it was a stupid term. We are much more garden architects, let's say, and as an English landscape, garden is nothing else than a garden, just on a big scale. Landscape is something for agriculture, or maybe for nature, if there's any nature left anywhere. But what we do is gardens, is this recreation of places, let's say, enforcing of places, giving places new meanings, rescuing them, whatever you call it. But it's always having a will and a certain amount of manipulation to make them contribute in one or the other way to a certain identity that we believe to be the right one. Another element that has been used in the English landscape garden, that has also an incredible modernity, as I think, is what they called the clothed glass. And it was nothing else than a mirror to actually enforce, let's say, the mediatic experience and the flow. As I said before, the English landscape garden started as an image and became a reality. Okay, and this is something maybe we can very much relate to. We live in a time where we don't know anymore what is fake or what is real, no? And also we don't know what was first. You know, the Americans say fake it and then make it, no? So the idea that there is a flow between these realities and non-realities is something that, as I said, has always been part of a human narrative. We always invented stories, being the Christian story, being the Jewish story, being the whatever Islamic story, whatever you call it, or Buddhist or whatever. So being the religious stories, creating a narrative to make us cooperate, to make us do things together and believe in similar things, to be capable to live together in a more peaceful way, or just for the mere sense of enjoying, or to manipulate others. And gardens always been, let's say, a good way to show off, in terms that you know, when you're a new class, like in the Baroque, the absolutism, or as a political direction, the garden always gave you a sense that you're rooted and that you are not a parvenu, someone new that is just starting. The garden always creates this kind of sense of identity in a very strong way, as it is, as I said beforehand, a perfect analogy of what we are. a kind of mix of brutalism and culture, let's say, a kind of undecided swing between trust and fear, as Cynthia pointed it out in the beginning of our conversation. However, this device, I think, is interesting because it also shows the kind of dissolution of borders between picture and place. They used to use this cloth glass, as I said, it's just a mirror to walk through the garden. So you would take the little mirror and you would walk through the garden. So you would have the present in front of you, no, the future in front of you, the past behind you, the present where the mirror was standing. But you also could sit somewhere and admire the place, but not looking at the place, but looking at the device. And if you walk through Tokyo, through Toronto, through Berlin, whatever, everyone is enjoying reality actually filtered. So in the end, you could say that landscape architects invented the iPhone, the first iPhone being this cloth glass named after Claude Laurent, and being this kind of first augmented reality device, if you want, yeah, as part of the experience of the garden. Yeah, before they had these ugly glasses that you have to put on your head now, there used to be these things. So, and you can go on and understand how image, and we can also call it public relation, how the image drives and how the fake and reality and identity are a kind of a flow of these things. For example, the Rocky Mountains, without Ansel Adams, without these images of Ansel Adams, probably the Rocky Mountains wouldn't have meant much, you know? So the idea that you create the image before you create the identity, that you create an image as a firm would call it, no? You have a product and you have to create an image for that product. No? In reality, and when it comes to places, I think it works not very different. The only thing is that we, for whatever reason, as we are romantic, we think that really God helps us to do places, and we are touched by by a sense, yeah, that is stronger than anything. Instead of, let's say, misusing the system to also change it, as I think that it's important to keep the system flowing when things change, so that people can feel better in places or whatever. There is another story that is just and maybe not relevant, but it's part of this to make understood what I'm talking about. You probably know that movie. It's a Lord of the Rings, and it was set up in New Zealand, and they built up actually this little village that was visible in the beginning of this movie. They did set it up in the mountains there somewhere in the landscape, in a farm. And then when the movie was gone and they gave back the land to the farmer whom they rented it from, people started to come, fans, movie fans started to come wanting to see this little village. Yeah? And then the farmer thought, oh, that seems to be good business. So he started to run the place and to reopen it as a Hobbit village. No? And this went on to suddenly, again, a narrative, and a movie becoming suddenly in the travel book 100% New Zealand. A movie that is not set in a place suddenly becomes a place. So they created the New Zealandish identity out of a invented narrative, let's say, because they saw that could be interesting for them, you know. And also Air New Zealand became the official airline of Middle Earth. So the idea that also as a nation, as a place, you recreate identity on the flow, and there is nothing given, but can be made up, and it's being made up. Even so, nations would say that they are not made up, that they are given by God or whoever, by nature. Yeah, but it's not the case. Even when there is a bad movie coming out, stupid nations like New Zealand jump on it and make it their national thing. Yeah, or I don't know. This is a pretty old movie. It's Rocky, and Rocky plays in Philadelphia, a place I lived for some time because I was teaching there. And this is the museum, beautiful collection, whatever, and it lies on top of the city. And this guy representing the American way of life, you know, if you work hard, you make it, yeah, and very influential for a whole generation. So when Americans go to visit Philadelphia, they not only see the Bell of Liberty and other historic sites, they also go to see a statue of Rocky, a person that actually never lived. So it's just a very bad Italo-American actor, no, that suddenly becomes part of history. So he becomes real. A narrative is a little bit like Jesus. Well, if you don't believe, sorry. I'm not in America, so I can make religious jokes, I hope. But, you know, you have to believe. So believing makes things real, no? And it's the same with Rocky. Rocky never existed, but it became reality, and it's a statue, it's a real statue. So again, as I said before, it's nothing new. This idea that we have a flow of fantasy and reality, that we create stories, and the stories also we try to somehow materialize, is nothing new. The only thing that is maybe new is the velocity with which we make it. Okay, because it used to be, it's a human nature to do that. And also maybe what is new, or new maybe to our profession, I think that the landscape profession always been a very strong narrative profession. We always needed the stories to go with the garden. It was never enough to just have a place of beauty, but there was always a story. Where comes a plant from? Where is a statue from? So the idea of collection, the idea of cultivating, the idea of exchanging experiences. You know, when you go to someone's garden, they tell you, "Oh, I got this plant, and I have, and you know, and I have this problem, and that's the way I solved it." So there's always this kind of cultural exchange happening there. So the idea of narrative is important. However, we don't seem to be capable as landscape architects to use these ideas of narrative as strictly as we should. So as you could see in my biography, at the beginning of this lecture, I was born in Argentina, and the most important Argentinian writer is Jorge Luis Borges, who died mid of the 80s. But he had one interesting, that's a quote, and I like to quote him a lot. So he said that, he said actually the opposite of what we are used to here, that actually the original is unfaithful to the translation. So you always would think the opposite. You always would think that the original is the wonderful, the perfect, no? The pure, coming back to the idea of the nation state and the fascistic idea of purity, and that any translation of it is actually a depurification, and in those terms, making the idea or whatever the original worse. Yeah. And so he turns this idea around and says, no, 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 the original is the unfaithful, no, not the translation. Yeah? And this is maybe interesting to understand when you speak about migration, when you speak about identity, that in the end is maybe not looking for the original, but looking into everyone's translation, let's say, of that original, whatever that then is. Yeah. And I like that also as a strategy, let's say, of working. Also the idea of translating. You know, you could also say that the temples, the Greek temples in the English gardens are translations. Yeah, they took even only a bad sketch of a Greek temple and rebuilt it in the wrong scale with the wrong stone, because they only had British sandstone. You know, so it became, let's say, translation. But as such, it has a worth of its own. It has, again, like the cedar, a certain DNA of the past, of Greece, yeah, but it's also clearly a British thing, you know. So it is several things at once. And this idea that we can be several things at once and don't need to decide to be one or the other is maybe something a bit painful, because it's easier to just be one thing and stop asking, you know. But on the other side, maybe a good way to interact and to redefine ourselves and to find new ways to do things and don't get stuck into kind of boxes. So Superkill, the project I'm going to show to you, that is motivated by all these ideas and many more, is situated in Copenhagen. It was a competition that we did in collaboration with Superflex and PIC, and that we won in, now I have to think when that was, I think 2010, and we started construction, I think, in 2012. And the idea of the competition, the brief of the competition was, this is a very bad neighborhood in the north of Copenhagen. Can you do a part that helps integrating whatever, creating a better context for the people, the immigrants who live in this neighborhood, as 99% of the people in this neighborhood are actually foreign. So in our approach, this is the area. So you see the Baltic Sea above on the image, and on the ground, you see this red square, the black square, the green square as being part of our project. It used to be a tram circle for tram trucks, for trains, that used to circulate in Copenhagen. The trams were taken out of the city in the 60s, so that space was transformed already into a park before we came to work here. And then there was this competition announced, to which we were invited. And what was interesting, maybe also to understand the context of this project, it was financed and it was programmed and it was done by a foundation called Realdania, a very unique thing, a foundation with lots and lots of money coming out of a collective property union that was sold in the, I think in the 80s. And from the selling of these properties, the foundation was established, and the aim of the foundation is to create public spaces, being theaters, kindergartens, but also parks. So, and the foundation, it's not public money, let's say, so it can be blamed to, they can't blame them to waste tax money, so they can do stupid things without being blamed, yeah. So that's important to understand. I never met an institution like that anywhere else. So it's very unique and it's worth looking them up. As I said, they're called Realdania, and it's really interesting institution. And again, they have lots of money. They're run always by an architect. So the head, which changes every 5 years, and the board. So it's all colleagues. So you don't need to talk to them like to stupids because they understand you usually, not necessarily, but usually, yeah. And so that you have, it's another way of dealing with them. So it's not the politicians, it's not the city administrations, it's another communication, let's say. So it's important to understand. As I said, this area is dominated by immigrants, and the brief was how to do that. And for us, this project would have, let's say, three issues. One, let's say the historic motivation of understanding gardens as places of non-places, of places of imported qualities, as places of somewhere else. You know, paradise is also a non-place, a dream, let's say. So not reality, let's say. Gardens as this idea of imported realities as part of the tradition of landscape architecture. Second motivation that was given by the brief was the idea of participation of people. So the problem here was that most of the people who live here are poor, maybe partly just immigrated, so they don't have the, let's say, the cultural knowledge of participation, because to participate, you also have to know how to participate. And if you were not brought up in Denmark, you don't know the language, but also you don't know the culture of participation. How does it work, this involvement, you know? And then you also have other problems. You are looking for a job. You don't want to know how your park is going to turn. You have real trouble, let's say, not luxury trouble. Yeah. So however, so we had to think of a strategy of participation that was different to, let's say, the standard discussions, because no one would show up. Yeah. That was the second. And the third, now I forgot the third. I always used to have three. Now I can't remember which one was the third, but it will come back to me. So one, as I said, the idea of the tradition. Second, the idea of participation. And maybe third, I'm making it up now, but maybe third, as it is relevant still, the site specificity of the physicality of the place, which was naturally divided by three. No, I know, now I remember what's the third. The third was the, let's say, psychoanalytical idea that has to do with a certain sense of coming out, let's say. You know, when you are repressed, when you have desires and anxieties that are repressed, you go to your shrink and he tells you, you have to let them out, you have to live, you have to learn to live with them, you have to incorporate them in your life. No? He is never telling you that you can solve them or get rid of them, because that's usually not possible. Shouldn't be the case, actually, because they're also part of your character, of your personality. So, and what does it mean for space? Because the tradition of making space is actually resolving problems, you know, repressing problems. Now you do beautiful granite and beautiful trees and two beautiful benches, and then problems are gone, you know. So this is how it usually works for architecture, for landscape architecture, by the way. So we have this kind of final solution strategy usually. So psychology, however, has an attitude that is more conflictive and accepts to a certain extent that we live as persons, as humans, with conflicts, and how can we make these conflicts become a positive part of us and not destroying us or others. Okay, so this is the third attitude of this place. So, as I said, one was participation. Participation, we had classical participation, but as you can see in this image, most of the attendees were non-Danish. It was very difficult to come into discussion with them. So what we said is that we needed, let's say, more immediate participation. That, as we said, it should be less political, but more hedonistic. In terms that we ask ourselves, what is that we enjoy when we work? We love the process of, let's say, having an idea and having that idea that we had in our mind suddenly built somewhere. You know, the joy of seeing the reality of something that you just had in your mind. This is one of the biggest joys you have as a designer, as an architect, landscape architect, whatever, is this momentum of fantasy and reality meeting each other and turning into something that makes you super happy. I never gave birth, but I think it must be similar. Yeah. So we said, but and usually in participation, you share, let's say, not the fun, but you share the pain. So if we compare it, if we stay with the analogy of pregnancy, we share, let's say, the heaviness of carrying the child, but not the joy of sex, and also not the joy of having the child later, let's say. We just share with the people let's say, the pain. Yeah. So we said, let's turn that around and let's try to share with them what is fun, the designing, that I would say is a sex, and then the reality of the thing happening and the pride of being your idea, your thing. So what we did is to create a system, a curatorial system, in which we set up several pages, home pages. There were several publications. We even went from door to door, knocking on the people to ask them to propose objects for the park. So instead of getting them into trouble of discussing if we want trees, parking, I don't know, whatever, we just asked them for an object from their culture, from their place where they originally came from. Okay, and we took these objects and translated. Some of them were also translocated, but most of them were really literally taken from the picture given to us and rebuilt, translated into the Danish realm, into the reality of Copenhagen. And so, and we were acting, let's say, more as curators. Yeah, saying we like that, we don't like that, that can go here, that we put there, you know. So we were acting, let's say, as the organizers of the party, and for the people, it was also a way to create ownership because it was their objects which happened to be put on space. Yeah? And so we had lots of elements, also not only, and to come back to it, not all the objects were proposed by the people. Let's say half of them were proposed by us. As we proposed them and we put them there. So we were a big group of people. So it was also not kind of pure. The idea there also wasn't originally pure, but also kind of dissolved. And so I always had a fascination with the idea of advertisement. Advertisement often puts you in the reality of a place. You know, places get more and more equal in many cases. But if you look at the advertisement, there you still can feel, let's say, how a culture really works, you know, if they are super banal or if they're sophisticated, or if they're, which colors they apply, you know, which kind of images they would apply. So, and these kind of things is kind of everyday beauty. So instead of having the temples, like in the British gardens, in the English garden, we took, let's say, culture of everyday. Yeah, that for me is maybe the commercial culture of advertisement. And also advertisement has something very ephemeric, it goes away very fast. So we like this. And so we started to collect things. This is from America, by the way, when it looks Chinese, is not. It's an American star. This is an object that I like very much. That was on one of our tours from door to door. We came to this guy and he said, oh yeah, I don't have time, blah, blah. But then coincidentally, he knew the translator. And then they started talking. And he said, okay. And he started to tell the story. And that his uncle is a dentist and that he paid for his trip. And then suddenly there was this image in his collection of pictures. And then we saw that and thought, oh wow, that looks super cool. Can we have that for our square? He said, of course, take it. Yeah. And so, and this is how then, let's say, the translation happens. It has different levels. It has this kind of, let's say, Islamic iconography. On the other side, it has also the tooth, what is that makes it a little bit ridiculous. So it's a little bit funny, but I think it's very important when it comes to understanding between cultures that you have to be capable of understanding that your seriosity or your narrative is maybe not serious for someone else, and you have to accept that. That's part of tolerating, I think. And then in the translation, actually something that was really kind of poorly done suddenly turns into a technical Middle European, I called it in German, Vorsprung durch Technik object, you know. So it has this kind of Nordic coolness from being, so it's again, it's like the temple, the Greek temple. It's DNA-wise foreign, Islamic, whatever. In the make, it turns into something Northern European and cold. So it's both. It's like the cedar, foreign and local in the same time. And yeah, so we have several of these kind of objects. We have also an American donut that is actually on the crossing to a real street. So people in the beginning were looking for the donut shop, actually where it would happen. So also the kind of idea that you dissolve borders between commercial ideas and ideas of a place. So where does place making start? And we also have this bull. I don't know if you know the story. This is in Spain. It used to be an advertisement for brandy. Osborne was called from Catalonia, but then they didn't want to, because the Catalans are a bit strange people. They didn't want the bull anymore being part of their iconography because it was too Spanish to them. So they didn't want to have it anymore. They took it away. It used to be on all the hills in Andalusia. So when the Germans and the Dutch would go down to have vacations in Spain, they would see the bull. This firm took it out, and then the tourists started to complain, where's the bull? So the Spanish government actually bought the rights for the bull, leaving the bull on the hills. That is not anymore, because it was there for 30, 40 years. It became part of the landscape, and without that bull, the landscape was not southern Spain. Obviously, the bull is older than the Osborne brandy. It's an iconographic animal of Spain since generations. However, there is a change of momentums in these iconographies, in these narratives, that create a kind of a flow that is maybe interesting also to apply into space. This kind of clarity, ambiguity of iconography, creating maybe in a sense an update of an English garden, a non-place, a collection of global elements, creating this kind of where am I actually, who do I belong to, and who am I? You know? And so we have Chinese advertisement. The star is from America, as I said, Russian stuff. And then we, as I said, and one important thing is that nothing in the square, including all the plants, is actually Danish. So so everything is foreign, a little bit like in the English garden. And you know, one thing that I'm going to talk about in a few seconds. I hope I don't need to come to the end, but you know, this place now is one of the 10 most visited sites in the whole of Denmark by tourists. Okay, so a place that was meant to be a neighborhood project, you know, in a rather secluded area of the city, becomes a national attraction, you know, and of which, and that was not from the very beginning, the state of Denmark actually advertises in its official homepage. Okay, so something that is full of foreigners, nothing is Danish in it, you know, something like the English landscape garden becomes part of a national narrative. And this is maybe what places can make in the best of the cases, creating identity for those that are actually also in need and in search of being part of a narrative, as they've been losing their old narrative from where they're coming from, but not, let's say, in terms of total adaptation or total dissolution of their origins, but let's say in a good new mix, in a good new ambiguity of all these different things. I always tell the story that there is you know, there is a physical relevance to immigration, that if you see the way people act in terms of body language, even the muscles you use depending on the language you speak, you know, if you're American, for example, even if you are whatever origin, you always will look a little bit like a potato because you speak like with your cheeks, you know. So that's the reason you use more of these muscles than maybe, you know, you in Germany, we sound always angry. We speak from here. You guys in America or in Canada, I don't know really. I'm not going to make bad jokes about you guys, but the Americans, however, are hamsters. Or the French, for example, they speak very much with their tongue and their lips. You know, that's the reason they have these beautiful French lips even before Botox. You know. So, however, and even if you have a different, let's say, ethnic background, biologically, your body reacts, let's say, to the influence of culture, language being an influence of culture. So that you can see how immigration is not only a social experience, but it's a body experience. And so it's a place, a body experience that actually creates this translation. So this is the red square with all sorts of different elements. This is a swing from Iraq. This is a muscle element, all sorts of plays. I'm going to run through it. I'm going to come back to this. This is a loudspeaker that has to do with what I explained about the psychological element and how, let's say, this place is a violent place. You know, it's a place with social difficulties. So you could say, okay, let's repress it. Or the way we did it, you know, the difference between crime and sports is not that big. You know, you hit someone in the face on bare ground, it's a crime, you go to jail or whatever, or got another, or you got hit back. You do it 50 centimeters elevated with strings around it, it's sport, and it's absolutely okay, and you can watch it. So the idea of creating a system, a narrative for violence is part of pacifying violence, rather than, let's say, forbidding it or repressing it. You just create a narrative to make it part of the character of the place, because violence is there. So instead of saying, we ignore it and we are all peaceful landscape architects and love birds, you know, you just say, no, violence is a reality. How do I deal with it? How can violence become a positive conflict for this place? And that's the way I talk about the aesthetic of conflicts. The idea that a conflict is not necessarily and per se a problem, but can even be a driver for making places more livable. No? And so that's, and the story of this box ring is actually, there's a Thai boxing club around the corner who was involved in the participation, okay? And they proposed actually to have a boxing ring on the square, because it's also something that you would see in Thailand as part of the public realm program, as a standard of public realm program actually there. And so this is one of my favorite objects, because it shows this, how important it is to accept the reality of places, rather than let's say your kind of do-gooder fantasy of every place, you know, to accept that there is deprived places, that there is violence, and how to deal with it, let's say, in a positive way. I'm kind of interested in. There's an app to understand where these objects come from. It's a little bit like the cloak mirror, let's say, of our square. So you can have an augmented reality for that as well. This is from Japan. So maybe this idea of translocating realities. This one was really built by a Japanese firm. You know, in Japan, many of the playgrounds are octopuses, and in Denmark, even being a sea nation, they don't have one single octopus playground. So the idea that you sometimes have to translocate realities, also to create this kind of excitement, is actually a traditional landscape architecture strategy, but hasn't been kind of maybe updated. No? So this one, and because it's in the black square, it's black, and it's there. The black square is actually interesting because it was called Black Market before. It's one of the biggest drug selling places in the city of Copenhagen. So, and again, rather than, let's say, trying to work against it, obviously, I'm not trying to advertise for drug selling or whatever, but the idea that there is a reality on site, and to kind of, let's say, giving the reality a kind of a coming out. So if they call it Sorte Market, the Schwarze Markt, the black market, why don't make it black then? You know, I mean, the sense of transgression between realities, and through this transgression, actually creating maybe, let's say, a new narrative that makes certain problems more tolerable. I don't think you can achieve much more. We also, as I said, all the plants are also foreign. These are Chinese palm trees. that due to climate change are very happy on our square. The benches from Greece. Yeah. This is a Moroccan fountain. Yeah. This is again the black square. Again the star, the half moon. Yeah. Now this is an object from Palestine. It's actually earth. You know, the idea of belonging often is related with the idea of the landscape in terms of soil, of dirt. So we literally went to Israel to get soil together with 2 Palestinians, because part of our participation program was actually to travel with 5 people, 5 of the people who proposed objects. We took them on a trip and got the object. Sometimes literally, one of them being the loudspeakers from Jamaica, one being the box ring, and one being the soil. Yeah? And I think this is the movie showing these different places. So we went to Jamaica, we went to Israel or Palestine, depending on your narrative. We went to Thailand. Yeah, we went to Spain to get the bull. So some of these objects that were placed on the square, and again, and this is maybe very relevant because all these stories, obviously, and this is part of the success of the project, that it is a narration. It has a very strong narrative that was constantly, because who is so stupid to pay some stupid immigrants a trip to Thailand to pick up a boxing ring, you know? So it was in the news, it was in the papers, you know? It was part of a creation of a new story. And to design stories, maybe, and this is the point maybe of my presentation today, that to create and design stories is maybe today as relevant as creating and designing, let's say, places in terms of good proportions, good materials, good planting, etc. Yeah, this is the 2 ladies putting the soil down, and for them it's very relevant. For everyone else, is dirt, you know. And this is the reason I think this is a very beautiful element. These are some other areas. I'm going to rush through. I think I made my point. This is a bus stop. You know, the best architecture the Soviet Union developed was bus stops. So this is from Uzbekistan, a bus stop that looks slightly Islamic. So we put the bus stop here and also did a bus stop sign in Arabic, but there is no bus stopping. So it's just a folly, it's just a temple without use, without but from everyday life, like the advertisement. So it's not a glorious Elysian element, but an element of everyday. And that's the reason, as I said, I think that it got a lot of resonance. This project got a lot of resonance. So welcome to the Strange Europe's public park. So CNN was talking about it. There's a book. We got the Aga Khan Award for this project. We were nominated for the European Architecture Prize as the first landscape architecture project ever. Same for the Aga Khan, first landscape architecture project ever awarded with that. Then, by coincidence, by the way, most of the narrative was actually influenced and manipulated by us. But then there's a school next to the site, and when the iPhone 6, that's almost prehistoric, but when the iPhone 6 was launched, a teacher sent a picture from the square to the company, and the company actually chosen the image to be used for their advertisement campaign. And then suddenly the project was not only on site, but suddenly, and I discovered it here. I took that picture from my car, actually. That is in Potsdamer Platz. It's a big square in the center of Berlin. And suddenly my project was bigger than the project itself, suddenly part of the reality of Berlin, you know. And again, where is a place? Where is a discussion? And where are all these realities? And some of them, obviously, as I said, are manipulated, but some of them are this one, let's say, by coincidence and not, because obviously the iconographic force of the design is strong. So it's good design, it's interesting, and it's very photogenic, and it's also important. You can't, let's say, as a landscape architect, hide behind, let's say, behind saying that we don't design, we work with plants. Sometimes you can, but sometimes you can't. So in that case, you can't. And so it was in the back of the New Yorker. So it was very present suddenly. Yeah? And this was sent by Lola. Lola is a landscape architecture firm from Rotterdam. And they went to the Dutch Institute for Urban Design, that is a national institution. And they just moved to a new place and have this carpet with the most important projects in the world, you know, I don't know, the Sixtine Chapel and whatever, put on their carpet in their office, and Superking is one of them. So the idea that there is a kind of, and obviously it's being also used for advertisement, as we use advertisement also uses it back. So it has this kind of back and forth between realities that is absolutely fascinating, and it couldn't have been more interesting in that way. So thank you very much for listening.
So,
shall I stop the sharing, or how do we proceed?
We'll invite Dietmar back to the table. Dietmar, yeah.
Shall I take away the sharing, or sorry, Dietmar?
maybe, yeah, later we want to share maybe a video. So thank you very much, Martin. You absolutely fulfilled my expectations. Your master of the narrative was very much fun, very entertaining, but at the same way, I always call best design is very intelligent, super intelligent design. So congrats for this project.
Thank you.
I have to say, you know, when it was published first, right after realization, when you see all these glossy images, you know, in the cover pages, you don't really know what was going on in the designer's mind. You know, was the first intention to have a very Instagrammable project, you know, Instagrammability as the new unit for measuring success. And obviously it's super successful, but maybe one of the first questions in my mind comes into my mind is really, and that's something maybe we can study at the Highline as well. Success makes sexy, but it can also be dangerous. Right now, years after, what happens in that district? You know, if you are too successful with your public work, you might initiate this process of gentrifications. What's going on in Copenhagen at the moment?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question, Dietmar. It's a crucial question. I mean, the aim, and we were very, very conscious about the idea that you can create gentrification. If you are too good, you create the opposite of what you want. Instead of helping the people you are building it for, you create desire for other people to move to the area, and all the people who you meant to help have to leave to, again, bad places, instead of enjoying the work you did for them. So we were very aware of that, and we always tried to use, you know, we have asphalt, we have these colored surfaces, we have very rough, we have a certain roughness, and we never, let's say, try to hide the roughness and substitute it with, so it's a special beauty that we have there, you know, it's not a classic beauty. So I think someone that is looking for an apartment to buy or to invest, that wouldn't be, let's say, the sense that you can sell it again well, wouldn't be given. So, and I think that in terms of gentrification, the area remains not that much different to what it was beforehand in terms of the people who live there. So in those terms, it was good. On the other side, the city on some point was very unhappy with the colors and let's say the way the asphalt was aging and the colors were aging. It was very rough. It looked actually a little bit ugly. Something that we had in mind, we never meant it to last shiny forever, but it was part of a certain roughness that we wanted for this neighborhood not to be ignored or go away. But people have the idea only that patina only happens if you have brick, you know, or whatever, something that ages nicely in terms of our romantic mind. So the city, with our support, but without our, or let's say with our consent, but without our support, changed the red surface to a brick red surface. Okay, something that we tried to convince them not to do, but in the end they couldn't live with this kind of contradiction of having this kind of roughness on site. So in this terms, I would say the project hasn't been successful, but it has adapted or has become a normalization that I would have liked not to have, you know. And also because probably they felt, because it was a successful and they had so many visitors going there, they felt that maybe they didn't want that kind of Copenhagen or Danish image to be the one transport. As I said, it's the 10th most visited site, you know, for a whole country. It's a small country, but still. So, and it's a country full of beautiful places. So And Santi, I think, I don't know what happened, but the city couldn't live with this, I would have preferred to repaint it or to make it part of a process. Maybe every year we would paint it different. I don't know. You know, I would have preferred to kind of keep it in a certain flow, but we couldn't convince them to do that. They wanted to have kind of again a final, something final, a solution rather than a process. You know, and we couldn't. Even we were very successful with this project. We couldn't convince them of that. So ambiguous outcome, I would say. I mean, socially, I think it was successful. I think the people are very happy, and vandalism has been very small. You know, I mean, this kind of things you would expect in this kind of areas hasn't happened, and people really feel related and identified with the space. They also like I mean, they are proud that they live in an area and suddenly people come to visit as well. You know, they like it. I mean, there's a sense of ownership to the place, I would feel. But my research is not necessarily objective. You know, I mean, it's not that I'm really doing a research on this. This is what comes to me. But as me being the author, the designer, I don't know if I get the negative so much. So that's what I can tell you.
Thank you very much. So I would like to introduce Cynthia Colemayor. I was asking her if she would be willing to join us for this conversation, and she agreed. So Cynthia is a landscape architect and environmental activist, just in a nutshell. 50 years, Cynthia, I realized it. Cynthia and Steve moved to Winnipeg in 1971. So she began her master's program at the University of Manitoba, graduating with an MLA just before the first child was born in 1977. Born in the United States, she holds the distinction of being the first woman to earn a Canadian Master of Landscape Architecture from the University of Manitoba. Maybe an important details, Cynthia, in this context. A stint in Toronto from 1997 to 1971 was enriched by your friendship with urbanist James Jacobs, where you developed an interest in the area of citizen empowerment. Now I know that you love caterpillars. Caterpillars make you happy, and homeschooling grandchildren is a new challenge. I would like to invite you to participate in the conversation. Do you have any comments and questions for Martin right now?
Well, just sort of following on the discussion we just finished about the paint color being changed. You know, over a period of years, in most cities, the composition of the neighborhood changes. This is a big theme with Jane Jacobs too. That, you know, it could be gentrified or that sort of thing. It's as the paint wears off the pavement, does the neighborhood change in such a way that it no longer works, or does the fun remain?
Yeah, let's put it like that. We never wanted to beautify. So we wanted to find a peculiar beauty, a characteristic beauty to the place, and not, let's say, a classical beauty, you know. I mean, Denmark is also this kind of romantic Northern European Protestant place, so they also love the ivy and the brick and whatever, and the rain, and be sad and love their dogs more than they love people, you know. So it's the same like in many other northern places around the globe. And we wanted, and the painting and the asphalt and the colors even were also part of the foreignness of the place. And in the end, I think the Danish authorities decided to make it more Danish again. No? So they kind of took over a little bit. It didn't accept so much the kind of, and if the wear-off of the painting was also the wear-off of the neighborhood, I don't think so. I think that the neighborhood is still rough. I mean, I would say the neighborhood is still kind of rough. I mean, for Danish terms, by the way, no comparison to American cities or other cities around the world, I would say, in terms of roughness. So for Danish standards, so, and even in comparison to Germany, it's not very rough, to tell you the truth, these places. But however, for their terms, it's a rough place. So it's not that the middle classes are moving there and are doing that. I mean, I always have had an interest since also working for Peter Walker, Martha Schwartz, and also, you know, Bulle Marx. And there is a kind of these graphical elements of landscape have been something that always fascinated me. And if you look over my work, you will see that it's a constant follow-up into my work into many different ways. Still today, I still do one project with painting a year at least to keep. So I love the idea that you can this kind of very thin film, you know, this the surface of the earth is what we deal with as landscape architects. No? That it's really a film between us and the universe, let's say. And I was being fascinated by that.
Really more about the, I mean, I have no criticisms to offer at all. I'm delighted with the graphic quality. It's wonderful. And I thought of Burle Marx instantly. Was more about the meaning for the people in the neighborhood.
Okay.
Does that evolve? Does it, you know, and I was using a metaphor about the paint on the pavement was sort of for the people too. As they become more Danish and their children start living Danish lives.
Okay, I got your point. Now, I didn't understand.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't understand you, Cynthia. I'm sorry. Now I understand it better. Thank you. No, it wasn't my thought, but it's a nice association. But it's, I mean, it wasn't what we thought originally, but I think it's a nice idea to think like that. It's not the case, so. I mean, the process of adaptation or of transition into cultures in Europe is very, very slow. I mean, you know, to become something, to become a national in European countries is, I mean, European countries have a very monocultural identity usually. So it's hard for them, and also for Denmark, you know, especially for the countries that didn't have colonies or any kind of widespread like the British or whatever, the French or the Spanish. These countries don't have these experiences, and so they are very kind of. So I think it's very hard to be. I mean, it's very hard to. For example, they call now the immigrants the new Danes. So you know, so it's still a kind of a difference. You know what I mean? It's kind of before you call them whatever, something despective, and now you call them the new Danes. So you always make the difference still, even if you do it in a more civilized way. You know. Yeah. In German, it's a funny term as well. You call the real Germans, the ethnically Germans, you call Bio-Deutsch, you know, and that is like how do you call it? What do you call bio in English? I don't know. Like from the whatever ecological food.
Ethnically, no, not ethnically.
Bio is. How do you say bio?
Yeah, it's hard to translate. I don't have an idea. It's hard to translate.
The bio shop. Don't you have? Whole food, how do you call it? The bio-essen in English. Don't you have that?
Yep.
Don't worry, it will come to you later. However, but European countries have a different narrative than the Americas, probably, and so that you whatever, I don't know. But in America you do it too. You say Chinese American, or you say, you know, you have this kind of that you have to point out that they are not real Americans. I mean, you wouldn't call a British American, or German American, but you call a Latino, a Chinese American, you call Chinese American. You know, you also create this kind of fine difference to make clear that you are a little bit less whatever. So I don't think this transition from painting to brick is part of the process. It would be nice if that would be the case, but it's not. I think it's rather a way to claim the land back by the real Danish.
Interesting.
But this is my interpretation. I mean, it's pure association.
One aspect I very much like that you were talking a lot about gardens, you know, in this context. So Wilhelm Flusser, another author I like to quote very often. Yes. Somebody mentioned that he would prefer to live in a world full with smiling gardens, but he feels to live in a world, he felt to live in a world with ridiculous gardens. Mm-hmm. So when I look at your work, Martin, you seem to like to play, but your play seems to be very serious. So how do you find a good balance, you know, to control your madness? What makes you play serious?
Medication. No. Yeah, I mean, tricky business. I think it's a little bit try and error and a little bit of experience. And also, let's say, I love to quote James Joyce, you know, there's this famous quote, fail, but fail better, you know? The idea that it's not about succeeding, but failing in a good way, you know, so that it's a different attitude, but it helps you to loosen up and to allow yourself not to be perfect somehow, you know, and many things we did and do go wrong to a certain extent. So you have to also take the risk, I think, and be willing to take the risk into things that actually don't work. You have to use, it's also test grounds. I think the public realm is also a test for society, for design, you know. It's different to private area, you know, where someone wants to sell something or whatever. You know, these places are actually to test us as a society, to test us, you know, to see, are we that, or do we want something new, or, you know, it doesn't have to be as a final again. I think these are the real playgrounds of society, you know, it should be used as such, and don't need this kind of stiffness of final designs. I think the opposite.
But you need purpose in crime, you know, willing to take that risk. Cynthia, what do you think? Do we live in a society being open, you know, for taking such kind of risks? Can you imagine such a project in?
Well, I was thinking for sure that you had more accepting clients in Europe than what we have here. And yeah, the idea of parks being pretty framed as trees and grass here is pretty strong. In Winnipeg, we're actually having some more interesting work done. It's happening. We had a big sculpture installation years ago in Assiniboine Park, and the way they got it in was to say it's temporary. And that's how we managed to keep it.
Yeah, wonderful.
And people were shocked by it, but they've grown accustomed to it. And they noticed how their grandchildren love to run around it.
Yeah.
So it's a very conservative environment. And I also think that there's so little exposure to innovative design in Winnipeg. It has improved massively in the last 10, 20 years. But there's so little exposure to the simplest thing. We tried to do a Woonarf in Regina, not accepted. And halfway through construction, it was not accepted, which you can imagine the nightmare that was. So I think we're kind of provincial still, but that there are some wonderful things happening, and I think we need to discuss them more, and it's happening more and more. But it's becoming an article or two in the paper now and then, and it's amazing stuff. But it has to be seen and experienced.
No, I think it's good to play with the idea of temporality, and you need good work. I mean, you have to also convince with good work. But I must say, as I said in the very beginning of the presentation, we had the best client you could ever wish for, you know.
Yes.
Well, I have to say that they had money, they were super supportive, you know. They paid for all our stupid trips, you know. They did every stupid idea we had, they paid for it, you know.
That's amazing.
And that's amazing. So that happens one in a lifetime as well, I would say. And so it was a good momentum. So you have to hope for that. I don't know, it's not easy. And provincial, yes, it's true, but I also feel that these terms are also changing as places get more and more connected and globalized, even like small places, you know. The periphery is also changing as a concept. I mean, you can't hide anymore so much in the periphery as you used to, and the periphery is getting much more urban, much more informed, less whatever. I mean,
I'm not sure what you mean, the periphery.
Like places that are not in the center of interest, you know, places that are kind of in the end of the world, like you guys, are more in the center of interest than they used to be, because of information, because of traveling, because of these conferences, because of lots of things. And sometimes wonderful things happen much more in the provinces or in the hidden places that they might happen in the places that think of their own being finished and not in need of this kind of creative stuff. You know, inferiority complex can be a very important driver. So you have to misuse it. You know, you have to tell them you're very inferior. You need one project from Topotech. You know,
be brave.
One more question. You mentioned it was a design competition.
Yes.
Because, you know, sometimes you have projects, you have good clients, they are willing to spend some money to open their pockets, but then
Yes.
it's also an obligation for the designers. You know, there's no guarantee that the project will turn out to take some risks and having a kind of a pioneering character. How important are design competitions? Because I know you as an office participate in many design competitions.
We do, till today, we do 50 to 80%, depending on the year, on competitions. Actually, you know, we also, as I like to cross borders, we also have, we opened up an architecture business as well 3 years ago. Okay, and won big competitions actually, and they are so big that they actually, their income, their fees is much bigger than the landscape fee. Okay, and there were competitions. That's the reason I would say, project-wise, I would say we have 50% through competitions. Income-wise, because of the architectural competitions we won, I would say that 90% comes from competitions. Okay, the competition is a tricky business for two reasons. One is that the competition usually doesn't necessarily make the best project win. So you have to usually be very preconditioned. You have to really know and risk, but not risk too much and whatever. But like in everything in life, there's exceptions and you have to test them. So sometimes I do competitions where I risk it, you know, I just don't care. And I say, I want to try that. And if you're lucky, you win them. And Super King was one of them. I never would have thought we'd win that. You know, I never would have thought we'd win that. And so in the end, competitions are good. But it's also difficult to get these risky projects to competitions because everyone wanting to win and looking for jobs, quite simple. Also, let's say, is not honest totally. You know, it doesn't go out with the most stupid ideas, but it tries to be like kind of mediocre in a good sense, let's say. And usually, but we were lucky. You know, there was one guy, I was trying to remember his name, a landscape architect from Aarhus, an older guy, and he supported us incredibly. You know, there were 2 first prizes. They chose 2 projects because they were scared of us. Yeah. And they let us 1 year, they tested us for a year. Yeah. So we had to go there and present again and show them that we are capable, that we can manage the budget and blah, blah, blah. But there was one guy, without him in the jury, we wouldn't have made it probably. And he just was convinced that our idea was super cool and that he supported us. And the rest of the jury believed him because he was an older guy, a respectable age, you know, intelligent and good arguments, and he helped. I mean, and this is the things you need. You need to. I mean, I sit in juries nowadays myself, and it's very hard also from within the jury to help sometimes, you know, because you have one voice, you know, of many. So I mean, I believe in competitions in general is a good democratic way to get jobs to everyone. Let's say. And in Germany, it works okay. In Switzerland, it works perfect, I would say. Switzerland is, most of the public work is done through open competitions. In Germany, you have to apply for them and you have to have experience and blah, blah, blah. So they're not as open anymore as they used to be, but still, so that as a young office, you have the chance actually to establish yourself through competitions if you win them. It's hard enough to win them, the competition among the offices is very, very hard. So it's not like given. You also can. Many offices try for years and give up at some point because they never win anything. So they do something else. But I think to have the chance to play the big games with the big boys without having to have rich parents, let's say, is a good thing in terms of social equality. In terms of design, I think that you can do probably more radical design if you are hired directly. For what you can do, probably, you know, and a client has the money and has the will to hire you because they want you and your attitude and your abilities to be applied somewhere so that they leave you alone with whatever. So the competition is not necessarily good for artistic outcomes. Usually the stuff is usually more normal. Not necessarily radical, as your title says. So.
Cynthia, what's about the competition culture in Winnipeg or in Canada? What are your experiences? Design
Very-
competitions. Don't talk
very-
about RFPs.
Very mixed, very mixed. Mostly it was driven by the architects in our office, and we had a period where we did quite a few, and we would come in close, second or third or something like that, but we were discouraged by the success of graphically successful projects that might not be buildable. And I think that, you know, we're more of a firm that thinks about longevity and functionality than art per se. I think that, you know, that's a handicap, I think, in competitions generally. You never know, but it certainly didn't make any money for us, but it was energizing, hugely energizing. Everybody had to do it on their own time without being paid, because they're not well funded in North America generally. Not all of them, but most of them are not well funded. And so it was really a teamwork thing that really made a bonding experience in the office. No, we haven't done much of it in recent years. I think it's been maybe 10 years even, but I think there'll be a new demographic in the office of younger people that will want to do it shortly. I think I've finished with that. But it's completely different and we had a German employee for a while explained how German projects are achieved, and we were impressed with the fact that it's not tied down by the current political environment. A lot of it, again, it's about the client. If you're hired by someone who wants good design, you're lucky. When we did the forks in 1990, we were at the front end of it, and there was almost no political interference. So it was amazing. But that's a long time ago. And I don't really thought there's not that much happening here, but we had some very well run competitions, but they're rare in Winnipeg. That's not informing anybody of anything. I'm sorry.
Martin, Cynthia, I received permission for video. I think not too many people have seen that video yet, but I think it would be a great way and a great tool to introduce Martin, you know, to our place, the middle of the nowhere. We were talking about weather at the very beginning, and weather is always a hot topic in Winnipeg. It's cold, it's humid, it's warm. Now we talk a little bit about climate, because our extreme climate provides unique opportunities. And I have to give some credits first for the video. So the video is taken by Lawrence Bird. I think he's in the audience. So he was the pilot for the drone. Lawrence, so he's wait, I have to find the information. So Lawrence, I think a lot of people in the audience know Lawrence. He's an architect, planner, and visual artist, and a teacher in our faculty. So the design is done by the Seattle-based architects Thomas Cheney, and the design implementation. So it's realized, or this project was realized by Dave Pankow and his team at the Forks. They spent a lot of time testing dye colors, clearing the path, and applying the dye. So Cynthia, I think when you see the first images, it's a place you might even know better than your backyard. And I would like to ask you, you know, to comment and to introduce Martin to our wonderful Winter City while watching this video. It's a bit shorter than John Cage, very famous 433.
Oh, well.
So go ahead, Cynthia.
Our Warming Huts competition, which has brought in international competitors to build amazing little structures on the river, everything from a buffalo you can go into to a warming hut. The one I loved the best over the past was the, I shouldn't say which one I love the best, but it made the best photographs, is a set of Russian stacking dolls, one bigger after, one smaller after the other. Anyway, this skating rink that's made on the rivers every year has created this wonderful sense of community that was lacking in my life. And I'm not much of a skater, having grown up in Florida. And I'll go out there and do my best. Sometimes it looks like it's Antarctica. There's so many people on the ice, and you look from a distance, you see how everyone looks black. It's quite amazing. It looks like the penguins swarming in Antarctica to lay their eggs. But it's quite a wonderful experience for everyone.
Beautiful. It's really nice.
Martin, if we would have a chance to have you here in person, we would be there right now.
Please, I would love to do that. I haven't been ice skating since I was 16, I think. I used to know how to do it, but so some time ago. No, but that looks like amazing. I mean, this is really public space use with the weather, no? It's beautiful with the color, it's super nice. So this is an installation. This ice skating rink is an art installation.
Mm-hmm.
Lawrence, do you want to join us? Lawrence, you might know more. Are you still in the audience?
Hi, yes, I am actually. I can tell you a little bit more. This project was developed over a couple of months, and some of the biggest challenges were finding the right dye. It had to be something which was organic, biodegradable.
Yes.
So made with a dye which is usually used for water course tracing by scientists or engineers. That's where the dye comes from. And there was a lot of back and forth between us, the designer, and Dave Penko at the Forks over what would make just the right color. I don't know if I can tell you that much more, except that, again, the eventual path was also developed over time and had to respond to conditions on the ice, which change every year. It's really unpredictable where the ice will be safe. So Thomas Cheney in the States did an amazing job of reworking this several times. And we were really happy with the calligraphic effect that came out of it.
Nice. Congratulations, it's a beautiful work, beautiful.
Thanks very much. I was just a facilitator. It's really Thomas Cheney and Dave's execution.
Very good, wonderful, it's good, very good.
And thanks very much, everyone, for including it in the conversation.
It's a fantastic piece. So thank you, because now we have to attract our guests. It was meant to be a little bit of temptation for Martin. Someone you might be willing to come here for workshop, another lecture, and for some skating.
Yes, please. In winter, please.
Yeah, it's the best time. It's a unique experience.
No, I can imagine. And I love snow, so I'm good. I think it looks amazing. I love when water freezes. I love this idea of a place that you can't walk on over the summer, something becomes walkable. That has something super magic. I think that's really nice. I like that. Yeah, very nice, very poetic.
This year the ice is dark and deep. Behind our place, we live on the river. You can look and it looks like this ice is 2 feet deep, and you can see that far down. It's magic. And I'm always looking out the window to see someone taking their cameras out of their pockets and trying to photograph the depth of the ice. It's so dark and magic. Beautiful. It's quite wonderful.
Yeah, it is. Wonderful. Very beautiful.
Okay, I think maybe that's the time to say thank you to everybody. It was fascinating, great. So I just want to announce, it was the start of our symposium, Atmosphere. We will continue tomorrow. We will have a first presentation at 9 a.m. Lyndon Neri and Rosanna Hu presenting from Shanghai. And we will have a next presentation tomorrow in the evening at 7 p.m. Kochakon Vorakom Land Process. Are you familiar with their work as well, Martin?
I'm sorry, I'm not.
The Bangkok, the permeable city, they create a lot of attention in the moment. And just over the weekend, there was an article in the Spiegel about her project, about a campus in Bangkok.
Well, I can get it. This week one, the one from last Saturday, or the stuff for the Woche vorher.
Pardon, say it again.
I mean, is it the Spiegel from this week or from the week
No, from
before?
this week. She will present tomorrow.
Okay, then I buy it. I have a look at it.
9 p.m. Winnipeg time. Might be not the most favorable time for you, but feel free to.
No,
So,
but
Martin, Cynthia, Jay, Lawrence, Brandy, Irene, great. So thank you so much.
Thank you.